think about that, 25 people have received the death penalty in America versus over 1 million abortions. And think of the people on the receiving ends here.
The FBI has cut all ties with the leftist groups ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center after Elon Musk applied heavy pressure on them. Elon Musk also applied pressure on Netflix and its users to cancel their subscription after Netflix aired shows that clearly showed transgender propaganda for children. Also, Pope Leo's comments on abortion could really change the political landscape of the pro-life movement and pro-life politics and could really have a negative impact. We'll discuss all that and more on today's show of InFocus. On our panel today, we have Wade Searle, U.S. politics insider, and author and journalist Stephen Cox, as well as myself. So stay tuned. We're going to jump right in. Our biggest story probably is the FBI cutting ties with the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center. These groups have defined really what counts as extremism or hate groups over the past years and decades. So this could be a big thing. And if it lasts, and the question is, how big of an impact will this actually make on the politics on the ground? Stephen, you've reported on this. What exactly is going on here? Can you summarize the story? And also, what do you think, how big of an impact will this actually make?
Yeah, I definitely will have a major impact. This was a big decision by Kash Patel, who I think honestly needed a victory after the Charlie Kirk assassination, because there's so much, again, we don't know about that yet. But this is big because these organizations have been around for decades, and they've been working hand in glove with the FBI to train their members on what constitutes hate speech and extremism and terror groups. Now, the problem is, according to both of these left-wing groups, ADL being founded over 100 years ago. It's a very Jewish organization, as well as the SPLC, which is just simply a far more liberal and sort of a Marxist organization. Their understanding of what constitutes domestic terrorism and extremism really is far afield from actually what that actually is. So if you go on the ADL's website and you look up what their glossary of terms for hate speech actually constitutes, what you'll actually find is a lot of what just basic mainstream Christians and Catholics believe in, including terms like America First, Christ is King, certain Christian images as well. And even most recently, Turning Point USA. ADL got in trouble with, as you mentioned, Elon Musk, because he was a big supporter of Charlie Kirk and his free speech approach. And the ADL attacked Charlie Kirk for espousing Christian nationalism and being sort of not defending enough against the more extreme elements, so-called, in that movement. And so this really got them in trouble, and Musk started raising the alarm. And as you all know, again, as we've reported here at LifeSite, years ago, not even just 2023, the FBI partnered with, or rather used, intelligence, so-called, research opposition, if you will, from the SPLC to justify its monitoring and even targeting and discriminating against what they called as radical traditional Catholics, simply Catholics who go to the Latin Mass and who have strong views against immigration, open borders, and things like that. So these organizations have really been controlling our intelligence communities and weaponized the FBI against Catholics and others who are just simply Christians who believe in limited government and conservative biblical principles. And this is a much-needed turning point, I think, to borrow a phrase, in the effort to push back against leftist ideology and infiltration into our government. And this is a big win. And I think, again, this is problematic for the far left because, again, they pointed to radical traditionalists as being enemies of the state, essentially, and, again, spying on Catholics. Again, I think this is a great move by Kash Patel.
The thing is with this move by Kash is, the ADL and the SPLC exist to incite and discriminate against conservatives. The SPLC had an entire article against Moms for Liberty, which is mom-run group, obviously, of a bunch of libertarians, and they do meetups and conferences and things like that. And the SPLC classified them as a hate group. And they've done this as well to Turning Point USA, plenty of pro-life organizations, and the ADL as well, including everything under the sun in its glossary of extremism. And the point with this, what they were doing with Turning Point USA is by changing the definition of, fascism and racism to apply to pretty much everything they disagree with, they are effectively creating the environment in which you have normal, moderate Democrats, or I guess moderate in a certain sense, but just like your normie average Democrat who now believes that Charlie Kirk is like Hitler too. And this is the kind of environment that leads to what we saw at Utah Valley University, where Charlie Kirk gets shot by Tyler Robinson, who is, not some extremely out there far left communist or something like that, but seemed to just be a pretty normal Democrat, your pretty average Democrat on campus. And it's extremely concerning for that reason. But Cash really, this is a good move, and I like that we are, the FBI is distancing from the ADL and the SPLC, but it doesn't go far enough. We have to turn the machine against them. And, the left is really good at this. The left is extremely good at using the power of the federal government against their enemies. Conservatives, not so much. Conservatives are a little afraid to do that. And they're afraid to do that because they say when the left gets back in power, they're going to use our force previously as a pretext to push against us even harder. But the reality is we are in a political and spiritual war. That is conflict. We have to use the power that we have when we have it. So the FBI needs to not just distance themselves from the ADL and SPLC and leave them alone, but say, we're no longer cooperating with you. We're no longer taking your direction. The FBI has to investigate these organizations for their incitement of violence against conservatives, against Catholics. What they're doing is disgusting, and it is very intentional. What they're doing is extremely intentional. There is a certain effect that is created when you single out groups or individuals and you call them Nazis, you call them fascists. And these groups have not only huge platforms on social media, but they have connections and they have access to some of the most powerful forces in the world, like the FBI. And, if you're just a typical conservative, like if you're a member of a pro-life organization and the SPLC classifies your organization as a hate group, then, when the FBI comes down on you, what are you really supposed to do as the average person? So it's totally unacceptable. It's unacceptable that this relationship ever existed. But now that this relationship seems to be over, we have to push further and say we can't leave these people alone anymore. It's not enough to distance ourselves and say, you stay over there, the ADL and the SPLC, you can make your hate reports. You can call us Nazis and fascists and incite violence against us as long as you do it over there. And we'll stay over here and kind of just wait to get shot. It's totally unacceptable. The FBI has to go after these organizations in a legal and serious way.
The left will definitely use the power of the government when they're in power anyway. And this is really not, the libertarian approach really doesn't work here because there's a saying, I don't know who said it, but it's a good point. Like the side who wants to win will always win, obviously, opposed to the side that just wants to be left alone. So just wanting to be left alone is not enough if you're dealing with these leftist anti-Christian ideologies that are coming towards us. And the labeling of people as Nazis, that really, the Charlie Kirk shooting was really a sort of watershed moment for that, I think, because that shows what this means. Charlie Kirk is just, your normal sort of he's, at least in the American political spectrum, a normal conservative. Now he's been labeled as a Nazi and he's been seen as that, and he has been shot and killed. And this has global implications as well. I was at the March for Life in Vienna, where I live, last weekend, and there was a bomb threat, turned out to be a fake bomb threat at the church that where the mass was, the mass for the unborn before the march. It turned out to be a fake bomb threat. It's just a fake device that was meant to look or sound like a bomb. But nevertheless, this is a real threat, and their organization, sort of Antifa adjacent organization that organized the counter protests, they posted a picture of the burning of the church where the mass took place beforehand, where you see the church burning, and they wrote something like, let the fundamentalists burn in hell or something like that, and by fundamentalists, of course, they mean the pro-lifers, who are mostly Christian. And there was actually on the ground, they wrote several of their slogans like "My body, my choice" and so on the ground on the ground before the event. But one of the things that they wrote was Charlie Kirk was first and you are next. So this was really not really a veiled threat against normal pro-lifers here in Austria, which is, you see these things are global. The things that are happening in the US, they have obviously a very strong effect on Europe. Yeah, so this marking of people as hate groups, which, and as Nazis, which kind of is the same thing to the left, to a lot of people on the left. If you hear hate group, if the Southern Poverty Law Center says someone is part of a hate group, they in their head, they already make the connection, oh, they're essentially Nazis. And the Southern Poverty Law Center famously has their like hate group map where they have like marked like whatever hundreds or thousands of organizations all over the US. And that has real world implications and for the safety of people who are just even moderate conservatives or Christians.
And it's ironic because to the extent that monitoring extremism is needed at all of the extremism, especially violent extremism, is actually coming from the left. Like the ADL and the SPLC, they only ever focus on right-wing groups and even moderate right-wing groups. But all the violence we've seen, Charlie Kirk wasn't killed by some like MAGA hat wearing Charlie Kirk wasn't killed by a guy who's like a skinhead with an R-band or something. He was killed again, supposedly, by Tyler Robinson. He didn't have like a Karl Marx banner hanging up in his room. This wasn't like some extremely radicalized person. This, again, was just like your average Democrat. And the truth is, your average Democrat does want this to happen to your average conservative. And I think what everyone saw with the Charlie Kirk shooting was, Charlie Kirk has what some would call even moderate beliefs for conservatives. And so every conservative on some level, they're either where Charlie Kirk was at, or they're further to the right. They're more conservative than Charlie Kirk was. And so if your average Democrat cheers when this kind of thing happens to Charlie Kirk because they believe what the SPLC and ADL has read about him, and because, of course, there's severe ideological disagreement, then imagine what they want to happen to you and to your family if you're even more conservative than he was, which many people are. And so the ADL and the SPLC, in the plainest possible terms, they are trying to kill conservatives, Christians, Catholics. It is completely horrible. These groups are evil. And it just goes to show their goal is not simply monitoring extremism. If they were truly completely objective, monitoring all forms of domestic extremism all across the country, then they would naturally become focused on the far left, because that's where the extremism is actually coming from. That's where the violence is actually coming from.
Absolutely. And also from, maybe in the US not so much, but in Europe it's the Islamic groups, of course, as well, who are much overrepresented, let's say, in the terrorist attacks and violent crimes and so on. But I want to go on to our next story about Elon Musk. Say about him what you will, but he is having an impact on US politics, first with probably maybe had something to do with the FBI. At least he put pressure on the FBI to cut ties with the ADL and the SPLC. And now he's also been calling for the boycott of Netflix, because Netflix aired 2 shows, I think, that have at least 2, probably more, but that were sort of prominent, that promote transgender ideology to children in kids shows. And cancel Netflix has been trending, and Netflix stock has taken a hit. But my question is this actually going to be a real hit to Netflix, or is this just a temporary image thing? Because they have over 200 million subscribers, I think. So I wonder, is that actually going to have an impact, or is it just a short-term thing where conservatives can just feel good about, trashing on Netflix, but they'll be back to what they were a couple of weeks from now? What do you think, Wade?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I saw Elon Musk canceled his Netflix subscription. And it's ironic because the Netflix subscription is like $8, and this guy is $500 billion or something like that. He's worth an insane amount of money. And so I think it really depends on how far Elon Musk personally wants to take it. Because Netflix is a massive company. This isn't the first controversy they've ever been in. If you remember, in 2020, they released a movie called Cuties, which was about, little girls who were like 8 or 9. And they're doing super provocative sexual dances. And clearly the whole movie was marketed to pedophiles. And this blew up. This was a huge controversy. And everyone was trying to boycott Netflix back then. Now, of course, back then, Elon Musk didn't own Twitter. Trump wasn't in office. And then, so the landscape was kind of different. All these figures weren't really as involved, or at least not as powerful as they are now. I think there could be a difference this time around, but we'll just have to see if the momentum is there. I think Elon Musk can generate that momentum if he is this dedicated to it. So it really just depends on how far he personally wants to push it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the first thing to note, too, is that Musk has a sort of personal axe to grind with this issue. I know he came out less than 2 years ago speaking about how one of his children as now identifies as transgender, and he seems to have a great hostility towards the ideology, as he considered his child who is transitioning, so-called, like losing your son. And so he seems to have a sort of crusade against this, which is to be applauded, I think. And him speaking up against this Netflix issue is greatly appreciated by those of us who have seen this arising and see the problems, the moral problems with it for quite some time. I do just want to make a broader comment, too. If you look back a couple years ago, the effort to propagandize children is nothing new. In fact, Disney has been doing this for decades, and they got caught a couple years ago on a politically speaking, by Ron DeSantis, who is the governor of Florida, and he attacked them, and I think he came out with the better of that when they went basically to war with each other. Now, DeSantis didn't follow through with everything he was going to do against Disney. I think he wanted to repeal some of their tax breaks and things like that, but he, I think, came ahead, at least from the optics standpoint. And I think you've seen that, especially now after the Trump presidency, after he won re-election, you've seen other organizations scale back its DEI and other propaganda efforts, especially corporations like Harley-Davidson, John Deere, even Target, which was one of the very first in the entire country to promote transgender bathrooms, gender-neutral clothing, and Pride Month and things like this. So I do think the cultural appetite is there to cancel and really go after Netflix for pushing this. And if Musk continues, and if Trump gets involved even, and a lot of the other leading Republicans on Capitol Hill, especially J.D. Vance, who we know is a good devout Catholic, that really, I think, could turn the tide to answer your longer-term question, Andreas. And I think Wade is absolutely right in what he's saying, too. So
is also still on our minds in terms of U.S. politics are the comments made by Pope Leo about abortion. His infamous, now already infamous comments about, comparing abortion. So he was asked about the case of Dick Durbin receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award, or he was going to receive that until he refused to take it from Cardinal Cupich. And Pope Leo was asked about it, and he said, he compared politicians supporting abortion with politicians supporting the death penalty, or even, stricter immigration policies, and sort of took this seamless garment approach and just should have said, there's many moral issues, and sort of try to equate abortion, the murder of the unborn by the millions, with, other things that are not even moral issues on that are mostly prudential issues in terms of Catholic teaching. But I don't want to go into the theology of it all. What I want to go into is the political implications, because it seems to me this will have massive negative consequences for pro-life politics in the US, because it basically gives a blanket excuse to these pro-abortion Democrats to just say, you hear what the Pope said, and it's just like another issue. It's just like, no one gets all the issues right. Some people are, nice to immigrants, some not so much. Some like to slaughter babies, and but some also want to kill, a convicted criminal. So it's kind of all the same. Who really knows what's the worst issue here? I'm being a bit, polemic here, but that's essentially what's going on, and it gives also an excuse to most normie people, like most of my friends and most normie people who have sort of this view of abortion of, abortion is not good. I wouldn't personally do it, but others should be allowed to. I think Pope Leo with these comments sort of gives an excuse to them to stay on the sidelines on the issues and just sort of, keep the status quo and be fine with the hundreds of thousands of abortion each year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Andreas. This literally obliterates the entire momentum that had been building for the pro-life conservative movement, especially those 10 bishops who were courageously speaking out, I might add, against Cardinal Cupich, who seems to think he's sort of infallible on these sorts of things, especially since the Francis regime. But you're absolutely right. Every Democrat politician in the country who has ever denied communion for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years have now been given this major piece of ammunition to just simply play back in the face of every bishop who ever denied them. They can just simply say, well, look at what Leo just said. And now they have entirely justified their entire careers. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, they can now look back on their entire collection of their 50, 60, 70 years in office, really, and say, okay, yes, I'm a good Catholic in good standing now. All those bishops, those radical conservatives and trads who tried to attack me, they're absolutely wrong. And this is going to be very problematic, I think, coming up, though, in the future, because now every Democrat who's running for re-election in the midterms, and even I would add in the 2028 presidential race, again, Ocasio-Cortez, it's rumored she might be running. She's a self-identifying Catholic, from what I understand. She can literally just point to what Leo said, and will now neutralize the one issue that the Republicans and pro-life Catholics have had on them for decades. And I think this is actually coming down in the very practical nuts and bolts sides of things in the state of Michigan here where I'm at. Because just recently, the state of Michigan's Michigan Catholic Conference, the official policy arm of the bishops in the state, which is overseen by Archbishop Weisenberger of Detroit, who's been shutting down Latin masses left and right. He's been firing somewhat Orthodox, somewhat more conservative, faithful professors at Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. They have just appointed 2 pro-abortion state lawmakers to be the co-chairs, so there's 4 total, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, to lead the inaugural Michigan Legislative Catholic Caucus. And I just spoke with the state representative here, Jim DeSanta from the New Boston area, which is just outside Detroit. And he's a very faithful Latin Mass attending Catholic who has over dozens of grandchildren, very faithful guy who's living out his faith. He came out and said this is abhorrent. You cannot allow pro-abortion Catholics to be co-chairs of this Michigan Legislative Catholic Caucus. And he's absolutely right, but what these remarks from Leo now do is they completely undermine his stance, and the Michigan Legislative Caucus will now be able to say, hey, look, we're just following what Leo said. And my last point, Andreas, we just saw on MSNBC, again, these remarks are going to be going global. Michael Steele, the former Republican chairman of the Republican National Committee, he told a panel on MSNBC that this was Leo pushing back and debunking not just the Trump administration, but more specifically J.D. Vance, who for the last several months and years has been repeatedly speaking out against the open borders and justifying it in the name of the Catholic concept of ordo amoris, which again means there's an order to charity, which first means you love your family, then your state, then your country, and then you can allow in immigrants, right? Well, the left has already capitalized on that, and they're dunking on Republicans who want to simply have prudential and smart immigration policies. And now they're saying, well, Pope Leo says they're all the same thing. You can't just be pro-life and then also forget the immigrants and the death penalty. So this is a really awful thing that's been done and said. It's going to have long-term ramifications in the political arena.
I think Stephen's right. I was really disappointed by Pope Leo's comments. It is something to be said. There is really no moral equivalency between what the Trump administration is doing, deporting illegals who, in many cases, are criminals. We have no idea who they are. They're trafficking fentanyl, and they're really like invading America by the millions. And so for the Trump administration to take some action deporting them like he's been doing, I think is actually a very good thing. And I think there is no equivalency morally between that and the act of abortion, which is so sick. Really, a doctor and a mother turning against the unborn child and ripping it out of the womb. I mean, obviously, we know how horrible abortion is in that way. And so it was really disappointing to hear those comments. And even with the death penalty, I can see where some people might be coming from that are against the death penalty, where they say, how can you be against abortion but pro-death penalty when in some cases, innocent people get the death penalty. But the reality is, like, this year, it's something like 25 people this year have received the death penalty in America. This is really such a small number, and it's reserved for the most extreme possible cases where, there is undeniable evidence the crime was abhorrent and the death penalty is issued after a fair and just trial. This really is absolutely nothing like the over 1 million abortions we've seen in America this year alone. Think about that. 25 people have received the death penalty in America versus over 1 million abortions. And think of the people on the receiving ends here. You know, in the case of abortion, it's literally unborn babies. Like, they are the most innocent group ever, haven't even had a chance to live yet. And with death penalty recipients, I mean, look at what they've done with their life. It's the most abhorrent crimes. And, you know, a jury of their peers decided that that would be the appropriate punishment for their crimes. So there's really no moral equivalency there. And I think Stephen's right. I fear this will have a chilling effect on pro-lifers because, you know, Stephen's totally right. Politicians like Nancy Pelosi and AOC can now, you know, on every re-election campaign, on every election campaign they have, they can just run these comments from the Pope on repeat. You know, when Catholics say, I'm pro-life, and your position on abortion goes against my faith, they can now say, well, do you happen to be against the death penalty? Because your Pope says that makes you actually not pro-life. And so I fear that that's the messaging that Democrats are now preparing to use, and we're already seeing them use it. So it is really disappointing. And, you know, how hard is it really? Like, if you're Pope Leo and you're addressing the media and they're asking you about this, how hard is it to just say abortion is wrong? Like, with no qualifications, but, you know, I feel like there should be nothing at the end of that sentence, really. If you are just saying abortion is wrong and you are completely against it, that should be all that's said. There's no need to make this, like, strange, like, Chicago liberal argument about how you can't be against abortion, but also pro-death penalty, also pro-deportations. It doesn't really make any sense. It reminds me of something that, like, honestly, reminds me of some, like, liberal Facebook post that has been, like, auto-generated 100 times. Some kind of, like, liberal meme or something. I don't really know where that argument comes from. It's not a very good one. And so I was extremely saddened by those comments. But I think Stephen's analysis is completely correct.
He could have just said, like you said, abortion is wrong and not commented on the case. Like, he could have decided, if he didn't want the controversy of commenting on a specific case, he could have said, yeah, no comment on that. And just saying, you know, teaching an abortion is clear, it's murder, and the Catholic Church condemns it. That's it. He wouldn't even have to get into the politics of, immigration, blah, blah, blah. And even, a lot of people interpreted it, and I think, unfortunately, rightly so, that he was actually, his messaging was like taking shots at the Trump administration and JD Vance, like Stephen said. And that at the moment, you know, even if he disagrees with Trump and JD Vance, at a moment where it's about abortion, where it's about the unborn, that's, you know, the thing that he should condemn first and foremost, and not, you know, use this opportunity to kind of take pot shots at the Trump administration. I think that was just really unnecessary. I think definitely the worst moment of his pontificate so far.
One of the things I think, especially with Leo blessing this big glacier, which I call Glaciergate, these sorts of optics are the things that I think Charlie Kirk was also mentioning during the last months of his life. He said, look, this is problematic. I think many times these instances flare up and they dissuade those who are earnestly seeking the truth from actually converting and coming to the faith itself. So these sorts of things are some things that Leo has to be more aware of, and he needs to really change his approach, because his liberalism is shining through, and it's definitely having a downstream effect, a negative effect on those who are taking an interest in the church.
Thanks for watching this episode of In Focus. God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Aloha everyone, this is Jason Jones for LifeSide News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.